Of course, the budget is in full force on Monday afternoon. And of course, let's bring in our guest, Mr. Mariano Browne. Good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning. How are you?
Not bad at all. You got enough sleep? I saw you sent me a message after midnight. I said, this man don't sleep at all.
I don't actually.
You need to get your sleep.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, I'll try.
All right. I'll write you a note.
Okay. Good.
So welcome.
Good morning. And I, like you, I'm waiting to see what he will say in the budget speech myself.
Yeah. Anything you're hoping for? Paul, you muted.
No, I'm not. I haven't.
I said the interview done. You wait and see. That's all we need to know. Good morning, Mariano Browne. Thank you for joining us this morning. Well, it's that time of year again. And that time of year in an election cycle, that time of year in the context of the minister coming to the population a couple of months ago and saying the energy commodity prices coupled with the production levels widened the deficit, the originally projected deficit from the last budget. What we spoke to Robert LaHunt, former Minister of Public Utilities, Robert LaHunt, former Executive Director of the IBB, earlier this week on Monday, who indicated that it's a tough time and there are some imperatives the Minister of Finance has to consider. One, that this country, and I think he used the word poor, is poorer than we were 15, 20 years ago. And we are going to have to take some serious steps in terms of subsidies and transfers. We also spoke to Dr. Dax Driver, president of the Energy Chamber last week, who indicated that one of the suggestions that he made, and I'm saying a lot here, so you respond to it in step, I guess, before I come out of my head, and I can't remember it again with my age, that he thinks that the energy subsidy should be adjusted to put a heavier burden on those who use more electricity. Let's start with your general thoughts on what the imperatives are with the budget presentation coming up in this election cycle and where we are as a country, please.
Well, I think there's no. Let's put it this way: we are back to where we were in 2018, 2019, when effectively energy revenues were depressed. And the 2021 and 2022 were aberrations, meaning that the budget surplus that we achieved was unplanned and perhaps unexpected, because we hadn't expected we get so much revenue that year. So that's one. I think the other thing that looks to is what is your maintainable revenue position, and therefore, if it is your maintainable revenue position, what should your expenditure be? And the next question that follows from that is, what expenditure do you cut, and to what extent? Now, that's where we are. Right? The reality is that as much as the minister wanted to talk about a turnaround, 2021 and 2022 were not turnaround years. They were years in which we enjoyed better energy prices. First up, better energy prices have now gone, and we reverted to what we would consider to be a normal curve. And we have declining production. If we'll be able to maintain production of 2.5 billion cubic feet a day, and I think that's the intent. That's what he said in the last budget. Not looking for any increase. So you have to live within the revenue that can be generated by that amount, and that means you just simply have to cut your expenditure to suit. Now, how is he going to do it, and what is he going to do? Well, that's the interesting thing. And what is he going to say, especially in an election year? Quite frankly, I think he'd be tempted to cut it, but I don't think he will. I think that we will end up with a bigger borrowing position than he had indicated or that he had promised in the previous year. And quite frankly, I don't think the public is going to complain about that either, because the public is not ready and has not been prepared for the decline in income.
But that's one of the contentions of former Minister LaHunt, that as a country, because it has been the practice to prop up our depleting revenues so much in some people's estimation, by dipping into heritage and stabilization or borrowings generally from local and international agencies, that the population, it has not been effectively telegraphed to the population that we're in a different position and our lifestyles have to be different. How does a government do that without causing significant reverberations in society? Is it possible?
Well, I don't. Well, it's never easy, and it really requires you to engage the population in what one would call conservation measures, and you could only do that by example. It's not only for you; it's also for me. So, how does that work? Well, salary cuts to start, right? At a time when the public was complaining about the increases, or if not increases, the pension benefits that they had allocated to themselves that wasn't available to everybody else. Now we go back to the situation: do you keep it or do you give it up? What are the changes? We have the judiciary, for example, who are arguing that they can't keep staff at the current salaries. I dare say that goes quite across the public service. I mean, it was interesting to listen to the Chief Justice lament his position when 2 years ago he was berating the DPP for saying exactly the same thing. I couldn't tell the difference between what he was saying and what the DPP was saying. So, it, some of these signs are issues, and his argument was that the judiciary has not had an increase for 10 years. And therefore they were deserving of an increase and therefore should have one. Well, there are many people going to feel that way.
But is it a convention? I mean, I know as a country, growing up, people always tend to think cost of living rise, salary supposed to rise commensurately. That's the union's perspective generally. But have we had a tendency to look as a country at economically where we are? Is it that we're earning what we were earning 10 years ago when you got that salary increase at that level? And it also trickles into margins for private sector also. Is the country doing that kind of analysis? Can we afford salary increases? Are we willing to accept salary cuts? So just the word salary cut sends a shrill through people's spines, because many people are already struggling in what they're making. So just the thought of a salary cut puts you into a different tailspin.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there are some levels, and that's one of the reasons why we talk about what is the poverty line and so on. You have to do those kind of numbers, right? What is the household budgetary survey? What do people spend money on, and therefore what is a maintainable position? And the answer is yes. We've been in this position before. We were in this position before 1970. We were in this position during 1986, 1987, and we're here again. All right, and the difficulty with that is that we've always been operating. When income goes up, then everything goes up, and then when the reverse happens, then you want everything to come down. It's difficult to do, and where you've had those kind of instances of those difficulties, you've had civil unrest. Sri Lanka will be the one that comes to mind. That's one of the reasons why politicians and people in public office have to be careful with the signals that they send. And you have to be careful with the signals that you send, because people act on the basis of those signals and will blame you if it goes awry. So it is always about a certain degree of caution in terms of how we approach. Now, the Minister of Finance, for example, had signaled that when he started giving everybody 4% pay rises. Now, there have been periods where the country had no salary increases in fact, that has been the norm in the public sector. The only times that we had continuous salary increases, literally after the fact and negotiating after the fact, was during the period 1974 to 1986. When 1986 came, we had about an 8-year gap before we eventually had a salary agreement. And then we went through a couple of periods where it kind of went normalized, and then we went into another long gap. And we were at this stage again until the last set of negotiations. It was about 9 years, 10 years before they had final salary agreements. Right, so these are difficult times, and they have been for quite some time. I think the minister let his hand go in terms of the expenditure in 2021 and 2020, so in 2022 and 2023. Right now, he's going to be in a difficult position to maintain it, and the only way he can maintain it is to borrow. The numbers are pretty stark on that one. He himself in the affidavit, I don't know, did you read it, those 42 paragraphs on June the 3rd?
I read some, I didn't read 42.
Well, the 42 paragraphs are pretty stark. He talked about the credit rating of the country, the fact that they couldn't continue deficit financing, that the TTRA was critical because we needed to basically make certain that everybody was paying their fair share and the tax collection was stronger. All right, it was a litany which effectively said that he was in a very difficult position. Right? And I suspect, one or two things happened. He didn't address it during the media budget review, though he did say that he expected the deficit to climb to $9 billion. Right? And afterwards, he promised that the government would. I'm not so certain he was talking to the country as much as he was talking to international associations or bodies like the IMF and so on, that the government would exercise restraint with regard to his borrowing position. Now, he's in that position now, right? I think we've been lucky. Both rating agencies have confirmed our rating as stable, and therefore we just want to run away in terms of S&P with regard to being at what one is considered to be junk bond status, right? So that means we have no degrees of freedom, right? And if that is so, and what he said in the affidavit effectively says about expenditure control, right? Which is a difficult thing to do in an election year, but that is the reality.
But hasn't the administration been signaling that, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance? So almost, because a budget is not just dropped on people, you start getting hints and signals as to what to expect so that the shock of the announcement on the day of the budget is not as profound.
Well, that is true, right? But I can say that so far, those signals, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. And quite frankly, I don't get the impression that we've been committed to action. Quite the opposite. Every day we hear about something else, another, well, not so much another priority. We have another, some sort of graduation for some sort of, if you want, transfer mechanism. Right? They can't do that and survive in the long run. It can't.
How important is that survey? The last survey that I was able to find regarding the poverty levels in the country, because one of the things Robert Lujan spoke about is the Gini coefficient and the wealth disparity that he suggests is growing, where more people are living under the poverty line. The last document I was able to put my hands on was one done by Kyrie and Associates, I think in 2014, which spoke to, I think, a 14 to 18% of persons living under the poverty line. It increased during the pandemic. I don't know if that has changed because I haven't had the ability to get in data regarding that. I don't know if you have, but getting a sense of that will tell you where the country is in terms of what people are earning, and if there are more people living under the poverty line, and that needs to be addressed in the budget.
Well, the answer to that is yes. You have to do more, and you have to start with a base in terms of what is known to be a fact. Now, that household budgetary survey is meant to be done by CSO. I don't know if they have completed one, but certainly if you're going into situations such as the one that we are in, you want to start off by knowing whom you are going to target and what is the level, the income level at which you will want to stabilize a certain level of, if you want, transfers. And that's a critical issue. If you don't have that, or you don't have a realistic market estimate of what it's that you're guessing, and guessing in those situations, you could be horribly wrong, right? So unfortunately, but that is the position in which I think we are, and we haven't done one. So he's going into a budget. What are you going to be basing those kind of assistance levels on, right? And there's no excuse for not having data of that nature, right? particularly if it's going to be important to your social programs and maintaining a social level, a level of social stability. Right? That is critical. Now, if you don't have it, what data are you using? And it's a guess.
Well, I mean, we've had conversations like this before, and I think for a lot of the listeners, they're probably rolling their eyes and saying, "Yeah, we've heard all of this before." And so, what are the solutions?
The
How do
solution
we
is to
expand
work.
the How do we expand the economy? What are the solutions and innovations that the government needs to be introducing? What are the bright sparks? Where are we growing? Where are we not growing? Because we can't just throw up our hands and say, well, we had to wait on oil and gas to be found. And we can't just say, well, okay, this is where we are at, and this is where we are, and this is where we are to cut. That's not how economies work. Economies also work by the intangibles of things like optimism, consumer confidence, and things like that. So, what are the solutions in getting those things to drive?
I want to suggest to you, you ought not to be ridiculous. So let's start off with that. You can't change around an economy in 1 year. You can't change it in two. And if you haven't been doing it for the last 10 years, there's nothing you could do this year or in a budget speech to achieve it. And you can't achieve consumer confidence in the absence of detailed measures. Now, this administration has been in office for 10 years. 10 years. So I would ask you if you could remember one expansive measure that was designed to encourage and increase production in the non-energy sector. If you could think of five, or in fact, if you could think of two, if you could think of two measures, you could tell me. And then we could talk about consumer confidence and that kind of nonsense.
Well, well, I'm not here to give. I am not
The
here. I'm
moral
not
of
an
the
expert.
story is if you haven't done it, there's nothing you can do. The reality is that the confidence level are there at in the absence of action. Right? And that is the issue.
So, you're
Right?
saying the government hasn't taken any substantive action to grow the
No, the
economy?
answer is we've not. It is not an easy matter. That's one of the reasons why you have to start and you have to stay with it. The prime minister is on record as saying, "I'm this thing about diversification, diversification, diversification." I'm fed up of it, quote and unquote. Well, all right, here we are. We are at this particular point. You cannot come up with any measures. The only way to start is to start today. Right now, we could talk about the not so much the Phoenix Park, um, another industrial center, another what you call it, industrial park, Phoenix Park Industrial Park, and encouraging people to come in. Well, I mean, we back to where we were in 1986, with not 1986, in the 1970s and 1960s with that type of policy. That's not going to carry us very far. An industrial park that is based upon some sort of manufacturing, some light manufacturing, somebody's going to come in and fix it. Well, China's basically killed off the rest of the world where that is concerned. Right? They may be looking to shift production and get closer to the North American market, and will give you some jobs. It's not going to kickstart your economy, and when you need that, you need some market muscle. So Mexico, which has 90 million people and it sits on the border of the United States, is likely to benefit from China's investment in that regard, right? Because it's large, it's a large economy, it gives a domestic base, it has certain types of capacities to be able to do so. In a population of 1.5 million people, that is not so. Now, let's just look at some of the larger companies in Trinidad and Tobago. You could talk about Neil and Massey, you could talk about Bermudez, you could talk about Ali Mohammed and so on. Those are the companies which have grown up substantially, and done very well uh, after the 1986 period, and have done so by exporting, right? Not by expansion in the domestic market. And if you look at what the investment horizon is, they're all investing abroad, not in Trinidad and Tobago, right? So you're looking at a completely, your targets have to be at another level, the levels which are about 3 or 4 levels below that to get them to grow at a certain sort of middle market. But you have to have done so, you have to give them some market muscle and some capacity. And that you need to do that over a period of time. So you have to look and see what are the alternatives, so where they are in terms of coming up. This is about company by company, sector by sector. And because it's 1.5 million people, they're not going to have a lot of them.
But I'm glad you said, but isn't their strategy correct though? Because in their views, I'm
Yes,
presuming they feel they've reached market saturation here, so they
they
have to see
are.
markets abroad.
Well, that's the point. And I agree with that. Now you need to have a number of other companies who are in that position too, right? Not only five, not only four or five, right? When you listen to Massey's investment strategy, right? They invested in, they basically started taking position in North America. You look at Ansa Makal, they're doing the same thing. So you have a local maintenance position, and maintaining the market, some small improvements, right? So that's not going to heck of a lot of investment in the domestic sector. So you have to look at a completely different market segment and different set of actors, economic actors, to get them to move forward. Right now, um, confidence in the domestic economy is about controlling certain basic things. One of the key things in terms of confidence is crime. Otherwise, you're going to lose your middle class. The ones who could emigrate to, and the young people who figure that the country has no future will leave. Now, those are realities.
Not
Now,
will leave, are leaving.
well, all right. What you call it? People always leave. Some people leave. Some people
Yeah.
come back.
Mhm.
It's a different
But
situation.
it's the numbers that are leaving. People always seek.
I have no idea of the numbers. It's
Yeah,
anecdotal at
exactly.
this stage of the game because for the same reason, right? What is the statistical basis for us saying what we are saying? We have to have the numbers to be able to point it, and we have to be able to address it. We can't just simply say that because different markets are closing off and tightening up, therefore by definition the people will stay. Right? The best ones who can get opportunities will leave, and they're doing that. So we have to have some numbers to be able to treat with that. Trinidad's immigration has always been lower than the rest of the Caribbean, lower than Jamaica, lower than Barbados. Right? But the difference is that we've had what you call it reinvestment by Jamaicans and Barbadians abroad. Not so in the case of Trinidad. Right? There you can demonstrate where they are on the basis of the what one would call reflows that have come back into the economy, or if you want, the remittances. Trinidad does not have a strong remittance market. So those who are leaving are not sending money back to maintain at the same level as they are in other countries. Right? So it means something different for us. And we have had pockets of immigration. The numbers were what you call it, around 1960, just around the beginning of independence, after 1970, after 1990, right? And we probably at a different stage again where we're looking at a different change in the numbers as well. So immigration for us has not been as robust or as hard. I mean, our net loss is about 350,000 people, right, over the period. It's a significant number, but much less significant than it has been in the other, certainly in Jamaica. Right? But having said that, right, one has to be careful and one has to do certain things at this stage. Now, I'm not saying that it is easy. It isn't. Right? And one of the situations is you have to deal with the crime situation. Right? We were talking about this and we were talking about crime. Right? But the moral of the story is you have to have certain kinds of successes to basically help us move it through. Right? If you want to talk about confidence and confidence index, right, those are the kinds of things, and you have to appear to be addressing or be seen to be addressing the key numbers, not talking about it.
Well, you're saying the government has to have some level of successes in moving the needle forward. Do you see them having any successes at all? Are there any you can identify?
Well, I identified two. I said that in terms of the fiscal situation, um, the fact that we have some level of reserves at all, the fact that we have some heritage and stabilization fund, those are sort of basics that you could build on, right? The fact that we've been able to maintain our credit rating, right? Those are two or three kind of obvious or large positions. But in the domestic sense, all right, certainly with the issue of crime, all right, we that's not going anywhere, and it's certainly not going down anywhere, right? And if you have to stabilize the economy, to stabilize the economy, you also have to stabilize the social situation, right? And I don't think we are at that position at this stage. Quite frankly, I think that the levels of annoyance or anger with regard to crime is rising, and rightly so. You have to do something different other than what we're doing. It has a knock-on impact in the other sectors. You talk about confidence index, all right, and the other things that are likely to happen and so on and so forth. Well, you have to give people reason to hope. And the evidence has to be, you can't keep coming to community people and tell them, well, I did everything I could. Or I can't do anything else. It's not in my power, right? It's the commissioner of police have all the power and I have none. Well, where is that going to get us? Right? Do we have to, I mean, that's not how it's going to work. Right? So if you're talking about confidence index and what we want to do, what people want to know is that there is demonstrated action and we have demonstrated successes. The needle is going down, right? And that we could all feel confident that the needle is going down. Not because the police have claimed, well, forget about murder, but all the other crimes are done. Right? Murder is the number one number that everybody will look at because it is dealing with human life. And by definition, you cannot come and say it's just a PR job with regard to murder and everything else is declining and we have serious crime under control. I mean, that's rubbish.
One of the documents I recently saw is that if you did a quick calculation, on average, this government's budgets have been between 51 billion and 57 billion or thereabouts. They brought it down from where it was before. So if you do an average over the last 9 years, the government has spent just around $480 billion. That'd be correct, a correct general ballpark, of which they said just about 51% or a little above that are subsidies and transfers. What would you, is there a best practice where the parameters for subsidies and transfers lies, or is that unique to each country's situation?
Well, it's unique to its political and social situation for sure. All right. But subsidies and transfers cannot be 50% of your budget. I mean, that would defy, well, it won't defy any logic, but let's just put it this way. It's not a survivable number. All right. So you have to make some decisions where that is concerned. And we have to target, we're an aging society. Right? That's a reality.
But then what does that tell you about, because that level of subsidies and transfers is not unique to this Rowley administration and its last two iterations. It has been a kind of consistent trend for decades. And what does that tell you about the society's expectation or construct because of that we have not been able to reduce that and I guess elicit more independent living or more self-determined living?
The construct has been that we have energy wealth and the state will provide. That has been the fundamental concept, the fundamental tenet in which we're going. So we will put in a safety net to assure people. Now, under that safety net started to expand after 1999 when gas went up. The difficulties with safety nets is that they have a tendency to increase, not to decline. And it is not necessarily sustainable. As in everything else, if you have a booming sector, that booming sector lasts for a particular period. And therefore, you will be able to manage it or alternately to sustain it only to the extent that that leading sector carries us. Now, we are in a situation where that leading sector has started to decline. We reached a high of 4.2 billion cubic feet, and we're now down to 2.5. Right? That's a number. That's 40-something%. Well, if you were to take that and say that the social safety net improved because we're in a position to be able to fund it, but it has now declined by X, then your social safety net will have to decline by a similar amount for you to stay in the same position, not expand. So let's look at the numbers. The numbers in terms of transfers and subsidies grew as a percentage of GDP and as a percentage of the overall budget between 1999 to 2008. By 2008, it was approximately 30% of the national budget. In 2011, it went up. In the Patrick Manning administration, spent $15 billion a year and a budget size of somewhere between $37 and $39 billion. The budget then expanded post-2011, and the transfers and subsidies, the percentage of the budget, moved up from 35 or 40% to 50+%. And it has stayed there. Now, if your income levels are declining, then by definition, your transfers and subsidies ought to decline too. In absolute terms, it has. It has seemed stuck somewhere around 25, $26 billion. But 25 or $26 billion is not sustainable. Not if your revenue is going to fall somewhere between 40 and $50 billion. And the maintainable revenue for Trinidad and Tobago is probably somewhere between 42 and 45 billion. In which case, transfers and subsidies has to fall. So we move transfers and subsidies up under the UNC, right, to 50% of the budget, and it is still there, right? The PNM may have brought it down in terms of absolute number, but as a relative number, relative to the overall dollar spend, it is still very high. Now, every time we talk about we expand the sort of social safety net programs, you expand transfers and subsidies. If you're going to be running into an aging position, right, then your expenditure on social services is going to increase, right, which means that the transfers and subsidy number is going to go up as well. So you have to find a way, and you have to engage the population. Every time we talk about increases, the state cannot spend $2 billion on WASA on a continuous basis if we don't fix it. So you have to fix WASA, and people have to pay more for water rates.
So then when you hear property tax,
and by the way,
more for electricity, pay more for water rates.
But that's the reality, because
I'm not arguing with you. It is the reality, but politically there are repercussions for that.
Well, and the answer to that is yes. But the answer, you have to take the political repercussions. This is what the society is. This is where we're at, right? Trying to hide it and buy the country off, buy your political voters off, is not going to solve the problem.
It's like a Margaret Thatcher moment in the UK.
It's going to make the matter worse. So you have to address it. And that's the point where we talk about responsibility, right? That's responsibility. I have to address it. This is the situation we find ourselves in, right? We have to do something about it, and we have to make some of your efforts to be able to handle it. Now, the best utility we used to talk about T&T was a great utility. Now, T&T has not been able to pay NGC's bill. NGC can't afford to continue subsidizing T&T, right? When we have to deal with it. So, for example, I went on record, and I have been on record as saying that the basis of water rates is annual rateable value, ARV, right? Now, we've changed the basis for property tax from ARV, i.e. land and building taxes, and we call it ARV, annual rentable value. So that means at some stage of the game, they put out a press release saying Mariano Browne said X, Y, and Z. Right? This is at the beginning on this radio program, on this TV program, he said A, B, and D, right? But the responsibility for water rate increases is the, what do you call them again? The Regulated Industries Commission, which may be so. If I'm not mistaken, right, that has to do with all the scheduled prices for those who are on meters that pay for water by the gallon or by the meter or whatever, right? Not for those residential consumers who are not. The basis of calculation is ARV. Now, the Regulated Industries Commission will jump high, could jump low. That's what the act says. So somewhere along the line, you have to break the law to be able to stay in that particular position. But we don't want to tell people that they have to pay more for water. But it is the utility, given climate change, given everything else that is taking place, that you have to manage, and you have to manage in a sustainable fashion. And one of the key things about doing it is price. You have to treat with it. Everybody is prepared to buy a bottle of water, right, for $5, and never even bother to calculate what's the real cost of the water in your water tank, your 400 gallons of water tank. And if you realize it, you're probably using, on the basis of the retail value of that bottle of water that you're using. By the way, and you're contributing plastics to the environment to make matters even worse. So you're buying a bottle of water. Technically, everybody drinking water, buying a bottle of water. Right? And we're contributing to the problem with regard to plastics all over the world. Right? but we have never really calculated was the price of a tank of water. But if you use that retail pricing, you said now on what you call, you're using approximately on a basis of a weekly basis, a couple $1,000 in water, and people are paying probably on the basis of a quarterly rental rate, somewhere about what? If they pay $1,000 a year, but you're using a couple $1,000 a week in water. I mean, what does that tell you? Nobody's saying that you have to pay the market price for it, but they have to recognize that you cannot continue to subsidize it. That is $2 billion. The transfers and subsidies, $25 billion. $2.5 billion, 10% of it going to WASA. Right? And then we have a hidden amount going to T&T because it's being subsidized through NGC. Right?
Then fuel costs.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is that we have to come up with realistic recognition of where we are. If you don't fix public transport and find an interrelated measure to deal with public transport, then your roads are going to be clogged, and you're going to pay, and everybody's going to pay more. The reality is we aren't making the fuel anymore. We're importing it. We're using US dollars for it. And when they start talking about what do you think is the largest expenditure in terms of US dollars on a daily basis in Trinidad? Food? No, the answer is energy. That energy cost is the largest foreign exchange user.
But in addition to that, the Minister of Finance also made a declaration in the Parliament a couple of months ago, that when people keep saying the food import bill is $5 billion, he said no, it's closer to $8 billion now.
Well, that may be true too, right? But the largest daily expenditure of foreign exchange is energy. It gas at the pump, right? Half of which is going up in traffic jams. Right. So
do you expect him to deal with that on Monday? Can we expect another adjustment where that is concerned? I think he missed a year of adjustment, or he had the year before. He may have made adjustments to that. Do you expect another?
What we need is we need a certain clarity, right, and not opaqueness with regard to what the number is. Right? Are we buying? We had promised a long time ago that the price at the pump would reflect international market pricing. And we don't know it. At the moment, the prices are depressed. Energy prices are depressed. We've come down from 90 past 80, and we're now in the 70s and likely to decline. 2 years from now, we probably may have an increase in terms of natural gas and oil prices. All right. Do we know if we are paying the market price at the pump? Well, that's the calculation we need to make. Because if we are making the market price at the pump, then any kind of change after that is what you call it, is tax revenue. The reason why he didn't adjust it in the period 2015 to 2018, somewhere thereabouts, when the price was low, because he was making money at the pump.
No, that may not be. So how much has the pandemic and the after effects of the pandemic affected all of this?
Well, it has. But at the same token, it affected everybody else too. So we have to live with it. We can't blame the pandemic for what has happened. The pandemic affected everybody everywhere. Governments made mistakes, right? Just like everybody had dealing with a new situation, they didn't know what's going to happen. Probably we spent too much. Probably we didn't, in certain areas. But that's what happened, right? Now, we have to move on from that. Right, we are facing a number of challenges as we speak, and what you have to do is we have to set some targets about what we're going to reduce. We're going to reduce crime by what? Right. How are we going to deal with the issue of gangs? And I see somebody writing in papers that they're talking about gang court. You're capturing anybody from the gangs to try them in the first instance. Why would you have a gang court if you're not capturing anybody and you can't prove anything? Right. The reality is that we have to up our game at every level. And you have to have a conversation with the country about certain types of cutback, and you have to ask for their assistance and understanding moving through this period. If you fire this government and you bring in another one, it's not going to change the objective reality, The objective reality is going to remain the same. The only thing that you could hope for is a new government will be able to address the situation in the sense that they will take measures which will move them from point A to point B. Right now, we have to articulate what those measures are. This is a time for consensus between administrations, not for a continuous fight. Right? Because we have to agree on certain key points. I make the point right, with regard to subsidies and transfers. UNC came into office, and when the price of gas and price of oil went up, they literally spent $15 billion extra on subsidies and transfers. Almost everything else remained the same. The number that changed was subsidies and transfers. It went up to 30 billion. And when the PNM came into office, they brought it down to 25. But even at 25 is not sustainable, and we've probably been knocking between 25 and 27 billion on a continuous basis. When your revenue number declines, what you're going to keep it at the same level again?
How does the population assess whether we spend in different areas, whether it be national security, health, education, is value for money, or is there still so much leakage? How do you determine whether there's a leakage or efficiency or value for money for those spends, those expenditures?
That's pretty straightforward. Right? If the whole purpose is that you will develop an educated population, let's look at what the numbers say. And this year's numbers were a stark reality, and they are continuing from previous years. We know at the CSEC level, right, 45% are getting a full set of passes. Right. What else do we know? We know that the intake this year, 2024, started 5 years ago in 2019. What was the total number of people doing SEA in 2019? 18,800 approximately. What was the total number of people sitting CSEC in 2024? Right, according to the ministry's numbers, right, 14,000.
Yeah, just have about 2,500, 3,000.
14,235. So I'm missing 4,000. I'm missing 4,000 students. We don't know what happened to them.
I brought that up on several occasions, and you get a glib response. We don't know where they are.
All right, and of those 14,000, 45% got a full certificate. All right, 45%, and the inverse ratio is mean that 55% failed. Right, that's the one number we talk about, 45% success ratio. What we need to be paying attention to is the 55% failure rate.
Well, and I'm always surprised that I mean, they can't, well, they shouldn't be and can't fudge the numbers. But I was surprised that they were actually boasting that we did comparatively better in the rest of the region. But still, comparatively better is 45% had a full certificate and passed. But that automatically to me says, but what are you doing about the 55% who didn't pass, and the 23 to 25% every year that score under 30% at SEA?
Well, and that's the issue. It's a conveyor belt. Now, you have children going who are underprepared. They're not going to do well in school. So the dropout number is telling me that there are a large number that are underprepared. If you got 30%, but everybody was guaranteed a place, that's what we said. Everybody's going to have secondary school education. Well, the presumption was that they would be learning something, or that they would, there would be a certain measure of success that would occur thereafter. It's a conveyor belt. Year 1 and year 2 in your CSEC program is to build on what you did at SEA level. If you're not properly prepared and you have no remedial capacity within the secondary school system, and there is none, you can't expect to get a better result, right? So you have to fix at the primary level, right? That takes years. It means that if you go back and you fix at the primary school level, what happened to all your throughput for the next couple of years? Because you can't just fix immediately, right? This takes about a 6-year cycle in terms of catch-up, right? So if you have 6 years of catch-up, six multiplied by 4, that's 24,000 people that's still under the level by the time they get through. What are the alternative programs? What is the remediation? Those are the kind of basic numbers.
And then that's education, national security, same underperformance at some level. Health,
well, yes,
challenges in the healthcare sector.
Where are those students going? Right? They are going into the system. They're going to be fitted in. You're going to have declining performance at different levels because that's what's coming up. Right? So that tells you that you have to fix at the base. Right? You're not going to see immediate improvement, and that's the answer, Richard. Right? You're not going to see immediate improvement. If you don't start now, you'll get the same thing that you're getting down the road. Right? So let's stop the fluff and let's get on with the basics. Fix at the base of the system. And so the
A lot of grandstanding.
right?
A lot of grandstanding.
That's what you've got to do. Not talk the rubbish and what you call it about, about the perceptual indexes. You have to deal with the issues, right? The only way you could change the perceptions down the road, and it takes time to do that. This is a moving conveyor belt, right? So you have to put remediation programs at every level. But if you don't fix at the base, you can't expect what is coming up to be any better than what went before, right? So you ask about what measures. That's a significant measure, but it will take time to fix it. Everything is going to take time. So the answer is that you better start rather than just simply continue. And that's what we've been doing. We've been in the business of continuance. Everything is continuing, right? We say we're doing X, Y, and Z. It has to be, that's the power of focus. When you focus on something, I could help fix it.
Well, focus and accountability.
Well, the two things work together. Now,
Well, no, you could focus and be focused on the wrong things, eh? You could not be accountable or monitor performance.
Conversely, if you look at the performance at Keep, we're talking about 90%. It means that the 45% who moved up, those of the 45% who moved up, found their niche.
Yeah.
Right? What you want is 90% of the other level.
Because they were prepared to move forward.
Well, all right. So there you go. But the answer to that, because of the other levels, we've cut it down. So the numbers are smaller and the numbers are better because they've been geared towards success. Right? That's what, and we have to remember the other 4,000 that dropped out went somewhere, That's part of the reason that we're having part of the dislocation that we have. A dislocated child is a dislocated adult.
Yeah. And a potential victim of gang involvement. So it's a cycle. Mariano Browne, thanks for being with us. We will hopefully get back to you Tuesday or Wednesday next week. You know how it goes.